everyone.
Happy belated. So, hi, if you don't know me, I'm Diana of Vegans Baby, and this amazing badass over on this whatever side of the screen she's on is Chef Suzi Gerber. She's a cookbook author, a restaurant consultant, and an all-around like just badass. So, I mean, hi, how you doing over there? You're in Boston?
I'm in Boston right now. Nice, chilly, gloomy Boston.
Oh no, I'm not even gonna tell you. I had to turn my air conditioning on today. And I was like, it's too soon. It's too soon. It's April. I'm not ready for this. But like, I took my like 10,000 step walk this morning when I got up like at 8 in the morning, and it was hot. It was hot. It was not a happy time for me. I was a little bit like, too soon.
I wish it was warm enough for me to want to like do my solitary walk around my neighborhood. I really do.
So, I mean, it'll get there, and then you'll have the humidity to go with it, and it'll be so fun.
We've got a few months before the humidity sets in.
I grew up in Maryland, and like right around like May, it would start to get like sticky. And then by like the middle of summer, it was just like, I mean, you knew that. You grew up right outside of DC too.
Yeah, totally. I don't associate May with being like sticky, but I guess it's year to year.
That's true. And it's changed a lot. Like I remember when I was a kid, like in the wintertime, walking to school in middle school. So this is like, like this is gross, but like my snot would freeze. It would freeze, and you'd be like, "What is that? What is that?" And you're like, "Oh, it's just the snot in my nose is frozen." Did that ever happen to you?
I don't recall it as much. I recall a lot more stuff since I moved up here 3 years ago. My first year here, we had like negative 19-degree weeks, and I was like, I am not prepared.
Yeah. No. I mean, you bring a desert rat there, and I'm not gonna go outside all winter.
Yeah. I mean, I might be converting because I can't handle this. Like, it's snowed. It snowed a couple days ago. It's April. It snowed. I like time to get out.
Well, see, Vegas is funny though. Like Vegas is like unbearably hot for like 2-3 months, and then it gets nice. It gets really windy, and then it gets really hot again, and then it gets chilly, and then it gets warm, and then it gets cold, and then it gets warm, and then cold, then warmer, then cold, and it just goes in this weird cycle. So like April right now, it's hot, and I have my AC on, but I promise you in May, it's gonna go back to like chilly again. Like I'm gonna have my windows open and maybe like a sweatshirt on or something. So it's just, we have weird weather. But anyway, so Chef, you are here today because we are doing some quarantine cooking. If you have been to Vegans Baby, or if you've been following along on this page or YouTube or anything, I have started a series of recipes using pantry staples you can make at home. And I am reaching out to all of my amazingly talented chef friends because y'all know, if you know me, my ass can't cook very well. So Chef Suzi here is going to show us how to make, well, I'm just, actually, you know what? You take it away. You tell everybody what you're doing, and then we're gonna, hopefully you guys are gonna cook along, maybe.
So here's a little preview. I made these chips ahead of time just so that, you know, I can shove them in my face while the other ones are baking. And, you know, the main ingredient in these guys is black beans. If you did your doomsday prepping, stockpiling with your dried beans or even your canned beans, please feel free to follow along. The recipe is going to be available on Vegans Baby for you to cook along to this video at a later date or right now. But I also add some chia seed and some flax seed, as well as some lime juice, salt and pepper. And feel free to add additional seasonings, which I'll go over as I'm adding them. But the goal here is to use your shelf-stable goods, simple, findable ingredients that have a maximum amount of nutrition, a minimal amount of processing that you can complete at home, so you don't have to just be eating cans of beans right out of the can or chili for the 10th night in a row. So these chips are going to be great with the hummus that we make later using some dried chickpeas, but they're also going to be amazing for things like nachos using some vegan queso, which might be making a guest appearance a little bit later. So without further ado, let's preheat our oven. I'm going to be preheating the oven right now to 350 degrees so that it's ready to rock and roll when these babies need to go into the oven. So give me a sec.
And if you guys have any questions about anything, feel free, please drop a little question in that question box. Chef Suzi will answer it for you. If you just want to know anything, cooking or just general vegan cooking questions, we can help you. All right, my dear, I'm going to let you take it away.
So I've got everything sort of set up here, and I'm going to go review with you guys a little bit at a time. Dried beans are an incredibly economical way to stock up on beans, and they do require a little bit of a rehydrating process. If you take a look at the recipe, you'll note that I have instructions for use using an Instapot. The Instapot is like for people who want to use dried beans but are impatient and don't want to rehydrate them overnight and cook them for hours and hours, and I don't blame you. So I'm also doing them in a slow cooker, which is another method that you can use that takes about 4 hours, or you can do them in the Instapot. So this is what the chickpeas look like when they come out of the Instapot in terms of the hummus. Now, starting first with the black bean chips, I like to stock up on black beans all of the time. They're one of my absolute favorite foods. They keep incredibly well. They add a lot of color and a lot of nutrition like iron and magnesium and protein to the foods that you're eating. And in this particular recipe, we're going to be doing something a little unusual with those black beans. Instead of rehydrating them and cooking them and making them into a dip, which of course you could make a dip, instead of doing a chickpea hummus, you could do a black bean dip instead. But in this recipe, I'm going to be taking about a half a cup of dried black beans and putting them right into my blender. Now, if you don't have a Vitamix, which is what I'm using here, you can also use a food processor, or you can use the alternate recipe that I've provided that uses canned black beans with some cornmeal to dry it out and get that nice crunchy texture. So nothing else going on in here, just black beans in a Vitamix. We're going to blend it into a powder. Gotcha. So right here, so let's take a peek. So it's still a little bit on the chunky side. Let's see if I can get a good video close up here. Still a little bit on the chunky side. I'm going to put it in for just a little bit longer. You can see the chickpeas here in the slow cooker simmering in some liquid. Looking pretty good now. It pulverized it pretty well. I'm going to throw you back on up here. So I've got this flour that I just made out of black beans. You can use the same method with any beans. You can also mill your own flour in case you can't find flour in the store. You can get wheat berries and crush it up into your own flour. And I'm just going to go ahead and dump that right in. If totally dry, completely unsoaked black beans are what we're using for this part of the recipe. So straight out of the bag, straight out of the container, right into the blender or the food processor, and you'll find that a half cup of black beans that we used turns into 3/4 of a cup of the flour. So if for some reason you find yourself with access to black bean flour, you can skip ahead and just use 3/4. I do like to grind it myself. It's an amazing flavor that gets added by grinding it yourself, but also the texture. If you think of bean chips or even corn chips, that crunchy grittiness is really part of the experience, right? And with that in mind, I'm going to be adding some whole flaxseed and chia seed. Now, if you only have one and not the other, go ahead and just double up on whichever one you have. Flax being a personal favorite of mine for things like chips and crackers. I'm going to go ahead and dump it right in. And now is a part where you can get really creative with your choices. So right in here, I've got my seasonings. The recipe calls for salt and pepper, keeping it real simple. I've decided to go ahead and add a little bit of smoked paprika and cilantro. You can experiment with things like cumin or chipotle seasoning, really depending on what you end up wanting to eat it with. And because it's a dry ingredient, we're going to add it with the rest of the dry ingredients right here. Black bean flour can be used to make pasta, can be used to make bread, savory pancakes and waffles. And you can use it in place of nut flours in a lot of gluten-free baking as well. So mix up your dry ingredients here. And now it's time to add some flavor. So here's a lime. I'm just going to cut it in half. And if you're fancy and you have one of these, go ahead and use it to squeeze it in. If you want more lime juice, go ahead and use more lime juice. Recipe calls for a quarter of a lime. I made my chips earlier with a half of a lime squeezed out, and the flavor was so delicious, I'm going to do it again. If you choose to use half a lime, I would recommend using less of the water, and I'll talk to you about slowly adding the water to test for hydration in just 1 second. So, I'm going to go ahead and squeeze that lime juice in. A little bit at a time. If you're telling me it's that warm outside, I wish I was there too. My heat is legit still on. Oh, God. I need seasons. That's what traveling's for. That's true. R.I.P. the travel industry. So I've got my half a lime juice in here now, and I'm just going to bring this up closer to the camera so you can see. It's starting to get crumbly, which is really beautiful and nice. The next thing we're going to add is a tablespoon of oil. One of my default cooking oils is this avocado oil here. Let me see if I can just tone down that light here so you can see a little better. Nice tablespoon of oil. I'm also going to be spreading it out. So for me, olive oil has a very recognizable taste. So I'm going to be using olive oil for my hummus because the flavor is not only kind of expected, but I think it enhances the experience. In this case, I think black bean and avocado go very well together, but I do think it has a neutral flavor. It likes higher temperatures a lot more than olive oil. And I think a lot of the benefits that are in olive oil kind of disappear the higher you heat it up. So I tend to think of olive oil as something that I add in warm applications as opposed to hot applications, and avocado, safflower, and sunflower oil as being the things that I use for the really hot applications. So now I'm going to bring this back up now that I have this sort of mixed up. The color has completely changed. It's darkened and it's starting to look like kind of damp. And if you were to squeeze it together, it's going to start clumping, but not exactly clumping the way that we need it to, but definitely more than if we were to have just used that quarter lime. So I've got my half cup of water here, and I'm just going to add it 1 tablespoon at a time, but I will probably be stopping after about 3 based on how wet it is because of how much lime juice I used. You want it to get a little bit wet but you don't want it to be wet like pancakes that are drippy and runny, because the wetter that it is, the longer it will take to dry and become crispy, nice chips in the oven. So that was 1 tablespoon. Here's the second one. You definitely don't want there to be any excess liquid at the bottom. The good news is if you do this 1 tablespoon at a time and it ends up looking a little bit too wet for you, if you let it sit for a minute, especially close to the oven, that chia seed and that flax seed are going to start to gel and expand, and they might take care of that extra water for you, as long as you don't really overboard it by going too fast and dumping it all in at one time. So now see what happens as I start to mix this? It's starting to get kind of thick together into one big piece. Instead of those little clumpy bits, it's kind of forming together. So just a little bit more water, that 3rd tablespoon, and I'm going to give it one last mix up. So you can see it's sort of glistening, a little bit wet. When you bring it together, it has some stickiness and it's forming into these bigger clumps. That's what you're looking for. Wiping my hands off here. And I'm going to set the bowl to the side while I bring over our cooking surface. So I'm in love with these silicone baking sheets, but you can also use parchment paper here or a very lightly greased baking sheet on its own. But this makes life quite easy. And the best measurement to use is about a half tablespoon. A half tablespoon is the perfect portion to make the chips that I made earlier. You'll end up with about 24 of them if you're following my recipe. So I'm just going to scoop these all out. And then you can shape them. So start thinking about what shape it is that you'd like your chips to be. Do you want like a classic tortilla chip that's triangular? Do you want a nice big long rectangle that gives you maximum dip action? And I'll show you some examples of how they cook up in both shapes. And then we'll start forming them into those shapes. And I'll talk to you about what thickness and what they look like as they're getting ready to rock and roll. I'm glad to hear it, and I hope you do, because every one of these is like a meal. I'm telling you, balanced nutrition from chips and dip is kind of like every fat snacking kid's dream.
I mean, it's with the chia seeds and flax seeds in it already, like and black beans, like what's bad about that? Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, if you are the type of person that is trying to avoid oil in your diet, you could very easily substitute some vegetable broth or
Okay.
more lime juice or water in place of that oil. That oil will help it cook a little crispier, a little faster, but you can just cook it a little bit longer in the oven, no problem. So I'm running out of space on this sheet until I spread these out and form them, then I can arrange them. And I'm going to talk to you about what the easiest and best ways to set yourself up for success here are. So, grabbing a fork, any old fork will do, like this one. You're going to want to press it down pretty thin. And when I say pretty thin, I want to show you what I mean. So here's the triangle cracker that I made earlier, chip cracker. The edges are ever so slightly thicker than the middle. You may have noticed that on some commercial chips that you buy also. And this is about what you're looking to make here, whether you're going for rectangle or triangle. So you want them to be thinner than a piece of paper and just ever so slightly thicker than when after you cook them. So you end up with this flat thing. Avoid the temptation to just mash it all down together with a lot of force, and instead push down and kind of spread with the tines to try to keep it together. Just like that. Nice gentle motion. So this one is like calling for a triangle shape here. I'm going to form it into a triangle. And I'm going to pull in the sides, which will help strengthen the edge of the chip. Just like so. And then this is a very important part. After you've formed it, you want to make sure that it comes off of the mat really easily. That's as much about aeration as it is making sure that it's not going to smush down and crumble apart. You want it to make sure that it holds together and doesn't stick to the mat. So yeah, if you wanted to roll these all out into one big mat, you could then cut them out and pull away the shapes that you cut out. Take the rest, re-roll it out, and cut it out just like you would some pastry for sure. So we've got another good triangle formed here. Nice, thin, even, slightly thinner on the inside. Just going to make sure to position it. And this will also help save with space. And moving on, you can push it down with this, but I do find that the fork helps just a little bit more with integration. And so do your fingers. It's the best part about cooking for yourself at home is you can use your fingers. So I'm going for triangles. If anybody wants to see me make a square, just let me know. All right, making a square. Cool. So you're going to carry on exactly like this for all of your chips. And this is why I make ahead. So the magic of television, we already have chips made. And when you have all 24 of yours perfectly formed and shaped and beautiful and not sticking to your mat and spread apart, you're going to throw them into that 350-degree oven right over there. And while that's happening, we're going to shift our attention to chickpeas. Now, if you don't like chickpeas, don't have chickpeas, or just straight up want to do black bean on black bean action, who can blame you, really? I mean, I'm not going to blame you. So you can substitute black beans for the chickpeas in the hummus recipe to do a black bean hummus, or you can just make a black bean dip and go for chipotle, queso, you name it. So in here are chickpeas that I made using the Instapot method. You want them to be super soft, and one of the best ways to achieve that is to Instapot them with salt. They need to smush apart much easier than they would coming out of a can. So if you're using canned chickpeas, go ahead and give them a boil for about 10 minutes to really soften them up with a little bit of salt in there. If you don't have an Instapot, but you do have a slow cooker, I've got these guys. I soaked them for about an hour in some salty water and then threw them into the slow cooker with that same exact liquid, about 1 cup of dried chickpeas to 4 cups of water with 1 teaspoon of salt to get that same soft feeling. When it's time, you would just drain them, keep the liquid. You're going to use some of the liquid for the hummus and then save the rest for aquafaba to make amazing, wonderful stuff. We just did an aquafaba recipe on my cooking show last week. Really delicious, easy to use, freezes and keeps forever for when you get inspired. Chickpeas are a great resource. They are nutritious. They blend up well. And who doesn't love a hummus? So here we go on to the hummus. We've got the 1 cup of dried chickpeas that have been rehydrated in the Instapot. I have 1/4 cup of tahini, which is a sesame seed kind of nut butter, but it's a seed butter. Nice, savory, and delicious, going right in there. Yes, you can make hummus without tahini. It's not going to taste quite the same. You can use a little bit of sesame oil to get close to that taste. And you can either use an avocado for that fatty creaminess. You can even use something like an almond or a golden pea butter, or you can skip that entirely and just go for a thinner, lighter hummus with vegetable broth or a little bit of oil or maybe a mashed potato. A lot of substitutions are totally possible. So here's the liquid that was left over from my Instapot cooking. It's about a 1/2 cup of that aquafaba, and we're going to use about 1/4 of a cup here. Now, I'm using a food processor because I get a little bit more control using less liquid. But you can also use a blender, whether it's a Ninja or a Bullet or a Vitamix, of course. And then I'm going to add my delicious olive oil here. As mentioned before, I really do love olive oil when it comes to hummus. I think it's the right flavor in the right place, in the right application. So here's 1 tablespoon of olive oil going right in. And now let's talk about flavors. So traditional hummuses really vary pretty widely from recipe to recipe. What I have in here is salt, black pepper, garlic powder, oregano, paprika, not smoked paprika, regular paprika, and cumin. This to me is a classic profile of a good Mediterranean hummus. However, very pure classic recipes will have simply salt and pepper or perhaps a little bit of paprika. So flavor as you wish. And then the next most important thing is the juice of 1/2 a lemon. Now that's 1/2 a lemon when the lemons are not half the size of my head. So in this particular case, we're going to go back to 1/4 of a lemon. So it's important to get familiar with recipes when they're calling for certain amounts of lemon juice or how much of a lemon to use. Understand that the traditional size of lemon that you're seeing, if you're seeing something smaller or larger, or if it feels hard and kind of dry and old, that you might be getting a different amount of juice from that lemon, and to sort of plan accordingly. I'm going to squeeze that juice right in. And away we go. Let's take a peek inside what's going on. And some people really prefer hummus to be thick. Some people prefer it to be sort of oily and thin. I will say that when you're starting from dry, even when you're rehydrating, adding more liquid as you go is usually a pretty good strategy. For some people, that means a little bit of olive oil. Sometimes that's going to mean a little bit more of that aquafaba that you saved. But you can get to the texture that you like your way with or without using large amounts of oil. Gonna taste it. And I definitely think a little bit more lemon would be delicious. And the rest of that aquafaba. Getting it nice and smooth and creamy. That's looking pretty perfect to me. So I'm going to bring you over with the magic of television to the previous chips that I made. And we're just going to scoop this hummus in and bring our special guest, queso dip. Taking a chip, little bean on bean action. Let's see how it tastes. This is like an entire day's fiber in every bite. Not to mention omega-3s, shelf-stable ingredients, really wholesome stuff, very inexpensive. So this queso dip, I made one or two of my cook at home show every Monday night live on Facebook. And we made this out of carrots, potatoes, and oats. So with simple ingredients that you have in your house, you can also make delicious vegan cheeses that also coincidentally taste really good with black bean chips. So good.
I'm a little bummed I didn't have all the ingredients. I'm also feel like I'm not coordinated enough or skilled enough as like a cook to do what you just did and like film and cook at the same time. I tried that the other day when I was making dan noodles and it was pretty disastrous. So I leave that to the experts so I can just watch and learn. Where can everybody find you?
With my mouth full.
I know, sorry.
You can find me on Instagram. Let me make myself presentable again. At Chef Suzi Gerber. That's Suzi, S-U-Z-I. That's me, Chef Suzi. Chef Suzi Gerber, the plant-based gourmet, as well as on my blog at Big Picture Vegan, as well as every Monday night I do Facebook Live on my Facebook. That's facebook.com/SuziQZ, SUZY, just to keep you on your toes. Every Sunday morning you can see me at the Sunday brunch show, 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. The Monday show is on Facebook, 7 p.m. Eastern time.
And do we want to talk about
Oh yeah, I have a book coming out. Isn't that weird? At some point this year, when business and the economy reopen, which honestly needs to take its time on that one, so I'm not mad at it. But at some point, my book, The Plant-Based Gourmet, will be available for you. In fact, it's available for pre-order now. We got to the top of the charts for a little while. Top 100 in vegetarian cooking, top 100 in gourmet cooking. Really, really excited about all of the buzz around the book. Endorsed by Chef Chloe and Derek and Chad Sarno and Doyle from the Misfits, homeboy. So, really looking forward to that actually finally hitting shelves, but you can see a sneak peek on my Instagram at The Plant-Based Gourmet, where you can see pictures and recipes and get all kinds of ideas. I'm super accessible, really easy to connect to. If you have a question about what to cook during this time, want some inspiration, or you just want to follow along on my Monday and my Sunday cooking shows, give me a shout.
Chef Suzi, thank you for being on here. It's always a Fido. He hung out most of the time too. He's been sitting here. This Fido. If you watch these videos, you know Fido. You're like your little baby cakes, aren't you? Say hi. No, he just wants FOOD, which he can't have at this moment. So, well, I mean, once we get off, he can. But thank you, Suzi. It's always, I love talking to you. I love getting to see your face. I love learning about cooking from you. Okay, get down. Okay, cool. Thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate it. This will be up on YouTube. The recipe will also. This is what he does every single time I'm wrapping something up. He's like, "Oh, now's my time to just get my little 2 minutes in." Come here. Everything will be up on Vegans Baby on YouTube very shortly. Thank you guys so much. Be safe, be well, stay home, and eat really good food. Take care, guys. Thank you, Chef.